All right, now joining us to discuss the President's address and progress made in addressing women's issues is Lisa Vetten, Wits Southern Centre for Inequality Studies Research Associate. Good afternoon, Lisa. Happy Women's Day, and thank you very much for joining us. So each year on this day, we commemorate the historic march to the Union buildings by those courageous women. We also use the day as a moment to reflect on how far we've come as women since that day, be it in the workspace as leaders, in our homes where we must be treated with respect by spouses, in politics where we must equally be regarded as capable of directing policy. How far have we honestly come, according to you?
Well, South Africa is a very interesting example of contradiction and paradox, because there's no doubt that life now is much better than it was 30 years ago. I mean, up until 1993, a husband could not be prosecuted for the rape of his wife. And if you were being beaten by your partner, well, there was nothing the courts were going to be doing about it. So I think in that sense, in terms of formal change, women's lives are very much better today than they were 30 years ago. But then we still have, side by side with those achievements, these very high levels of violence, very high levels of unemployment and poverty, very limited, and these, especially I think in relation to unemployment and poverty, these strike young women now much harder than they do than when women were young 30 years ago. So we're making progress in some ways, but as the world is changing, it's throwing up new challenges that we are not coping with sufficiently well.
When you talk about unemployment, inequality and poverty, that was something the President also mentioned in his address, that it disproportionately affects women, but went on to say that nevertheless, though, despite all of this, women are still in a far better position, stating exactly what you're stating.
Yes. So I think, let me put it another way. If you are young now, if you are under 30, I think you will not necessarily feel that your life has improved because you're not in your 40s or your 50s or older, for example. So I think what we have to do is look at not just what we've accomplished, but we've also got to look at the present. What is life like for those who are living now, and can their lives be made better? And I think that's where we need to be asking more questions. I think for those who are young now, it's not a consolation to hear that their lives
were worse off.
Correct.
So what is needed right now, specifically when it comes to gender-based violence? Because we saw the President today lead the signing of the National Pledge Against Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. What exactly is needed beyond this beautifully and powerfully worded pledge?
To be honest, pledges are a waste of time. What we really need to be doing is looking at very different concrete and practical things. I think, one of the things that for me was quite alarming was he gave these figures for the number of women who had been raped in the previous 12 months, according to the HSRC survey, which runs to over 1.5 million women. Our figures then, for the number of rapes that are being reported, which is only about 42,000 a year, suggests a massive and significant problem of underreporting, which is talking about a lack of faith in the criminal justice system, a lack of services, and the need to do so much more. So I think just things like victim-friendly rooms are not going to address that. Nor is asking men to promise not to hurt women. That really, that is not the cause of why men are violent towards women. We also need to be looking at men's circumstances and what it is that drives them towards violence. And in that respect, I think we're failing dismally.
Can we delve deeper, though, as to what drives this level of violence? Because I suppose the solutions are there.
There are many possible options. One of the things that is consistently found to, I think, play a very significant role in men's violence is their own experiences of violence as children and childhood adversity. So that means if we were to put more effort into child protection, into looking at childhood poverty, into looking into children's circumstances and how they're growing up, that could be a very significant interruption in that. If we were to look at programs, with young men in school, where we look at things like impulse control, their ability to deal with anger, how they perceive relationships between men and women. I think those kinds of programs in schools or universities would be much more useful, practically engaging with day-to-day relations than an abstract pledge.
But many would argue that, Lisa, the focus has changed to men, actually, that they did decide a while back to say, let us focus on the would-be perpetrators and focus on empowering and teaching the boy child better. So what of those that say maybe the criticism is unfair in this respect because the focus has shifted somewhat?
Well, to be honest, some of the research that we're seeing is not suggesting that these programs are very effective. We need to understand why they're not working. I'm thinking of one that was undertaken in Dipset, for example, which suggested that actually these programs may have made some of the most violent men worse. But what that study was doing, which was really interesting, was it was suggesting that we need to do more than behavior change. We need to look at things, again, like childhood adversity, like depression. And men are reluctant to come forward and admit they're having difficulties with their mental health, for example. They do not use services in the same way that women do. So I think if we were to look at something like that and to encourage men to ask for help, which they're not doing, that might have more effect than just saying to men, okay, sign a piece of paper that says you'll be a nice person.
Lisa, thank you very much for your insights this afternoon. That's Lisa Vetten, Wits Southern Centre for Inequality Studies Research Associate.